battle over election law is taking place in this country. It has been ever since the 2020 election, a major target for the Trump campaign and former President Trump's efforts to overturn that election. And joining us here to talk about it, ABC News political director Rick Klein. So, Rick, the president in Georgia urging the Senate to pass voting rights legislation. The Democrats don't have the votes to do it. It doesn't look like Senators Manchin and Sinema, who are opposed to changing the filibuster, which would allow the Democrats to move forward on voting rights, are going to budge. What's this all about? Is this a charade, or is he trying to placate his base? Does it actually have any practical effect on the battle over voting rights?
Maybe all of those things, Terry. I think there's a couple of different audiences to look out for today. One is the base, and there's been undeniable frustration that there hasn't been done more with more urgency on the part of the administration to try to address voting rights at the federal level, given the changes in Georgia and so many other states this year. Another audience is I think the civil rights movement broadly, a lot of folks who feel dejected around the pace of progress and trying to mobilize the American people. And then finally, probably the most important, relevant, immediate audience, those Democratic senators who don't want to change the rules. Manchin and Sinema, we've been talking about them for the better part of a year, Terry. They haven't changed their minds. Joe Manchin again reiterating that his preference is to not change any Senate rules without bipartisanship. What kind of carve-out we're talking about, a one-off around voting rights, it's all very touch and go as to whether that might actually see the light of 50 votes in the Senate, although the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he's going to bring it up for a vote maybe as soon as tomorrow.
We'll see where that goes and what the president can do to move the ball down the field. But, Rick, I want to ask you, there's a sense, certainly among progressives in the Democratic Party, that the president hasn't been doing enough to start this ball rolling. Presidential leadership on something this big is usually not flying to Georgia and making a speech. It's months of preparation. It's organizing and marshaling the forces of the government's communication efforts, of the party's communication efforts, of the agenda that the president has. And it just feels like he's saying, okay, now voting rights. Is that really an effective way to persuade people that persuade the American public that this is the biggest issue before them that needs to be tackled now?
I think there's a couple of concerns here, Terry. One is that we've heard this before. Literally 6 months ago, almost exactly, President Biden went to the National Constitution Center, called this the Jim Crow of the 21st century, said he was going to mobilize the American people against them. 6 months later, all of these states have moved in the same direction and nothing has changed. And we are now in an election year. We are only about 6 weeks or so away from the first midterm votes of 2022 down in Texas, which also has changed the way that it votes. Georgia and the rest, these states are locked and loaded with their laws. Congressional districts are redrawn according to the specifications, and these new restrictions are now the law of the land. And that's what's driving some of the frustration. Some close allies of the White House, including some prominent local civil rights groups, that said very publicly to President Biden and Vice President Harris, do not come. He's going anyway.
And he is. All right, Rick Klein, stick with us. We'll be back with you in a moment. But we have a special guest now on this issue, really one of the people who's been at the forefront of it, perhaps unwillingly. Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. You may remember Secretary Raffensperger. He was right at the heart of the vote counting in Georgia, where former President Trump was putting so much pressure on him personally, on that office, on the state, in order to get the election overturned. He stood his ground in accordance with the law in that state. So, Brad, welcome. You've had an interesting year and more, and as I say, you're a good voice on this. So if we could begin in Georgia with this new law that's passed by the Republican legislature there in response to the false claims by the former President Trump about the vote in Georgia. The details here, some of them are disturbing to a lot of people. Georgia's new law, correct me if I'm wrong, allows the State Board of Elections to take over from county boards, and it gave the legislature, a political body, power over the state board by stripping the Secretary of State's office, your office, of the chairmanship of the board. They didn't like what you did, so they stripped the office of any power to do so. It gives power to the politicians now to appoint their own chair. So how do you assuage concerns that this is a power grab by the GOP that didn't like, in your state, that didn't like the election the last time, the way you handled it, and have now essentially arranged it so that they can get the result they want?
The state election board will now be chaired by someone appointed by the General Assembly. But the state election board cannot replace and take over elections. What they can do is they can hire an election board, but it requires a review panel, which is actually ongoing right now in Fulton County. It consists of a Republican and a Democrat election board members from other parts of the state, along with our general counsel. It's a due process affair that they go through and do a deep dive and get information. Can Fulton County fix what they've been doing? This has been going on since 1993. And if you look at what happened in Florida years ago, we always heard about Broward County and Palm Beach County. Governor Scott replaced one of the election directors. Governor DeSantis replaced the other. And you don't hear about those counties anymore because now there's accountability. But the state election board cannot overturn the will of the people. It cannot overturn an election. It just wants to make sure that every county runs their elections well. And I support accountability.
All right. And so you support that aspect of the law?
I support that absolutely, because it's been going on since 1993. We finally have a measure of accountability. We also now can make sure that all lines are shorter than 1 hour at polling precincts. But at the same time, we've also increased early voting to 17 days. That's more than New York, New Jersey, and Delaware.
Right. There are a couple of other issues that I do want to get to in the law. The absentee ballot. What is the justification for limiting the time period, which used to be longer, for people to register for an absentee ballot? I think it used to be 6 months before the election. Now it's 3 months, and it's now cut off at 11 days before the election, I believe. But why would you shorten the time available to people, the citizens of Georgia, to do that?
Well, when you had it out there 6 months, some people were requesting it, then forget they requested and send another application. And that was bogging down the county election offices. But the 11-day is something that really is helping to enfranchise voters. Because what in effect it did, before you could request an absentee ballot the Friday before, you'd never get your ballot in time. Now with 11 days, you request your ballot, the county receives it, processes it, and then you go ahead and you send the ballot out to them, and then they can send the ballot back to you. So there's time to do that. But really what we need is bipartisan election reform. Did you know that 80% of all Americans support photo ID? And so Georgia now has photo ID for all forms of voting. We have photo ID for absentee voting, just like they've had in Minnesota for 11 years now. We want to also make sure that only American citizens vote in all elections. There should be a U.S. constitutional amendment, and I'm pushing for a Georgia constitutional amendment that only American citizens vote in our elections. I don't support what they're doing in New York or San Francisco, and now they're talking about in San Jose having non-citizens voting. And most Americans don't either.
Most Americans don't buy that. We had a time once in our history where non-citizens could vote. New York wants to do it this time. Utah did it 100 years ago, essentially to try to attract immigrants to the state. That'll be a debate that goes on. But to another aspect, why limit the number and the times of access for ballot boxes? What is the evidence that ballot boxes have been used fraudulently? They're very convenient for people who have work schedules or lives that don't allow them to make it to the proper voting place, at the right time. People work at night and such like that. Why would you limit it and limit access to ballot boxes?
One of the first things I did when I took office was ban and outlaw ballot harvesting. And so it's illegal to do that in Georgia. But there have been races that have been overturned due to ballot harvesting in North Carolina and also New Jersey. And we have an ongoing investigation in the 2020 election. That said, this is the first time that absentee ballot drop boxes have ever been put into state law. They were used as an emergency measure at the height of COVID. Now they'll be in each county, all 159 counties, one for every 100,000 voters, and they'll be inside the election office during normal working hours during early voting. And that's the first step of when they put those into state law.
So how do you answer the allegation from people in your own state that Georgia Republicans are focusing on some voters in some neighborhoods to disadvantage in this process, like maybe you don't trust minority voters in urban areas?
Well, we know that 98.5% of all voters have a photo ID because we've had in-person voting with photo ID for over 10 years now. And so we know that there's 98.5% of those. Plus we have social security numbers. That's another approved government ID. And then if you don't have any of those, you can also use your military ID or any other kind of government ID. There's about 12 to 14 other forms of identification. If you have none of that, we'll give you a free ID so you can vote no excuse absentee voting or early voting, which is now 17 days, or you can show up on election day.
All right. Thank you for that. That's helpful from your side as to how these laws are meant to work or intended to work from your perspective. Let me broaden it out a little bit and ask about your personal experience in the election of 2020. Here is a president absolutely determined to overturned the election, despite the fact that it had been certified by all 50 states and the District of Columbia, survived challenges in 60 courts, still leaning on you and your office. Given your personal experience, what are your reflections on the danger to our democracy from that kind of activity and from the sense that he is out there saying the election is a lie, that your work and the work of secretaries of state and local officials who counted the vote in 2020 is all a lie? What is the danger of that activity, to your view?
Well, after the 2020 election, I wrote a 10-page letter to Congress. They've had it over a year. They got January 6, 2021, and no one's ever disputed any of the points. We never found a fraud significant enough to overturn the election. But likewise, when I took office, the first thing I had was up to 9 lawsuits from Stacey Abrams and her left-wing groups that were talking about voter suppression. And then we find out when we get one of our people under deposition that they poll tested the word back in 2014, voter suppression. It was a way of getting out the vote. So it wasn't really based on honesty. It was really as a vote getter. And so she lost by 55,000 votes. And to date, she still has not conceded. She lost fair and square. And it's time she just accepts her loss. She's obviously running again. And so I hope that she'll accept the will of the people this time when she loses again.
Brad, I'm not talking about Stacey Abrams. I'm talking about former President Donald Trump. Under investigation in Fulton County for conspiracy to commit election fraud, leans on your office, calls up your people, say, "Find me 12,000 votes, guys." I mean, that's something out of out of a bad political novel.
I agree. Stolen election claims, no matter what side it comes from, really are a disservice to the American public because it really undermines voter trust. And so we've been pushing back on both of that. And what I've shown is I walk that line of integrity. I'll make sure we have honest and fair elections. And it's never been easier to vote in Georgia. We've increased the number of days of early voting. And we also increased the security at the same time. And I think that's good because that'll help restore voter confidence.
Well, what do you say to 70% of Republicans who believe the 2020 election was stolen, including in Georgia?
I meet with them whenever I can, and I help them understand, here's all the things that we did. But I do tell them that 28,000 Georgians skipped the presidential ballot. They're not aware of that. They skipped the presidential ballot, and yet they voted down ballot. And in the Republican congressional areas, the Republican congressman got 33,000 votes, more than President Trump. That's what happened in Georgia.
Well, let's hope that message gets up. Let me just ask you about the investigation that's going on in Fulton County. It has to do with President Trump's efforts to contact your office, pressure your office in order to fix the vote. Find me 12,000 votes, guys. That's all I need, is what he said. We have heard that former President Trump's lawyers have met with the Fulton County District Attorney recently. That is often a precursor step to an indictment. How has your office, which is really the victim in this alleged crime, been involved in this process? What can you tell us about that investigation?
Some of our people have, given testimony. They've come in and they've, talked to us in our offices, and we said that we will obviously comply with any request we can. It's a lawful, grand juries are lawful legal affairs, and so we will comply with any requests that are made and provide our information, provide the data that is requested of us.
On that phone call, do you think that was an effort to commit election fraud?
Well, President Trump wanted a certain outcome, but I knew that we had checked every single allegation that was made. There weren't 10,000 dead people. There was 4. There weren't 66,000 underage voters. There was 0. As it relates to felons, they said there was thousands. There was less than 74. So every single allegation was checked. State Farm Arena, we pulled in the GBI and the FBI to look at the whole run of tape and investigate all those, interview all those election workers, just like we did. And we all came to the same conclusion. Nothing illegal happened. And in fact, President Trump's hand-picked successor, Bobby Christine, did the same thing and dismissed that case in short order.
Well, it sounds like he did want a certain outcome that may sound like a yes. And finally, Brad, up here in Washington, we've got the January 6th committee looking into all the events that led up to the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. These events that you've just discussed may be part of that long train of causes of January 6th. Do you plan to testify publicly in Washington before the January 6th committee if they invited you?
I haven't been invited, but they asked me to come up and for an interview, and I gave them my information. But everything that's happened in Georgia is really out there. I wrote a book called Integrity Counts. I have a 1-hour conversation with President Trump that's out there also. And then I have a 10-page letter that I wrote to Congress on January 6, 2021, which is out there. And that, as it relates to that letter, the only difference that's happened, I'd said 2 people, and we found 2 more, so now there's 4. That's just 4, not 4,000. And no one has ever disputed any of the points that I made in my book or in my letter. And so Congress has had that letter for over a year now. And so I'll stand on our record that we had fair and honest elections in Georgia, and there was not ever a significant enough fraud to overturn the will of the people. And President Trump did not carry the state of Georgia.
Yeah, you held the line there. A difficult time then and a difficult position to have in your party now. Do you regret it?
No. You know, every morning I wake up, I can look at myself in the mirror. I can look at my wife, look at my kids. My grandkids love me anyway, but I think that integrity, you know, you need to lean into your integrity whenever that happens. And I think that's really what we need in America, and every elected public servant is integrity, character, values, and I think civil discourse and kindness. Those are values that are maybe small town values, but I think those are great American values that you'll see in all 4 corners of America, because Americans are basically good, honest, decent human beings. And so that's what I lean into, is the goodness of my fellow Georgians.
Absolutely. My dad used to say you have to respect the man you shave. And it sounds like you do. Brad Raffensperger, thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it.
God bless you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.